Let's talk about squash. Welcome back to Sprung on Food. I'm your host, Kae Sprung. This season, we're talking about favorite foods, the history behind it, and the role it plays in the world today. Joining me today is Chef Crystal Wahpepah. Crystal, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I am very excited that you are here. I have such a great respect for everything that you do in the culinary community and your community. And I'm very pumped to talk about your favorite food. A lot of times when guests come on and they choose something that grows from the ground, they're a little bit skeptical at first about like how much really is there to talk about, grows in the ground, very good, end of podcast. But those episodes are actually the ones that I secretly love the most because I always know that there's so much more to it than that. And I know, of course, that you have such incredible knowledge about it too. But I want to know why squash is your favorite food.
Well, one, it's something that I grew up with and I always seen like my family cook with. But then also, I love the texture and the taste, and I love the story most of all.
Yeah. And as we'll get into, and this is not really a spoily, but there are lots of different types of squash. Do you have any particular varieties that you gravitate to the most?
Yes, I love the winter squash,
Mm.
and that is with the Hubbard squash. And you can see the mural behind me. She's holding a Hubbard squash. And so that's one of the squashes that are real dear to me,
Mm.
just because it comes out like almost like a pumpkin kind of texture. But
Mm.
then what it really is, it says a lot of resilience and all the things you can do with it. You can dry it, you can make it in soup, you can make it as a dessert. That's one thing I love about squash.
Ooh, and I'm very much a dessert person. What are maybe some of your top dessert applications when it comes to using squash?
Wow, I love this one. I do a chocolate squash, like a chocolate squash pudding. And
Ooh.
so it's really silky, savory, nice and sweet.
Is
And
there a
it
particular squash variety that you will use for that, or is it versatile?
It can be versatile. You can have butternut squash, very easy to make, but at the same time, you can pretty much add any kind of flavors into the squash, and it really accommodates the flavors really well. Especially when I say you can add chocolate, and they all have this expression on their face, like what?
Yeah.
And it's really simple, just chocolate, and of course, squash really gravitates really more like into like brown if you want to add brown sugar, but like for me, I add maple. It accommodates the flavor, and you don't have to add a lot of ingredients where it comes into squash desserts. It's just
Mm.
something where it really kind of complements and how they speak to both.
Yeah. I mean, that's where your expertise comes into play,
Yeah.
obviously. Being a chef, you understand
Mm.
composition and flavors and textural components. I guess when it comes to savory, do you have a favorite way that you like to prepare it?
Yes, where it comes in, definitely, I always roast it first,
Hmm.
just because it brings out that caramelize and it brings out the flavors.
Yeah.
And so then from there, where it comes into savory, I love it like in soup. Something
Mm.
about soup and squash, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah, same. I'm big into soup, especially in winter seasons. I feel like that can just fuel me throughout the months.
I do one with instead of using dairy products, if I'm doing a squash soup to say, I always add like a pumpkin seed. I always blend it with pumpkin seeds because it really adds like flavor, texture, and it's also a good dairy supplement.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I always love when things can be very sustainable in that way. There's another episode that I did for crawfish bisque, the history of crawfish bisque that anybody can check out if they want to. And part of that original recipe and still remains today is grinding up the shells and using that as part of it to give it that additional kind of flavor and body, which I found I'm a vegetarian, so I don't really partake in that. So I wasn't privy to that information. And so I was like, oh, well, actually respect because now it's very sustainable. We're using different parts of it for a different purpose. So that kind of triggered that. And that reminded me of that, but in a, of course, in a vegetarian way. So that was,
Yes.
so that's very cool.
Mhm.
I love this, and yes, to your point, how versatile everything can be. So gives me greater appreciation for that, and of course, to better understand and appreciate our food, we have to know where it came from. Let's start with a simple question that sounds deceptively basic. What is squash? Because depending on who you ask, it's a side dish, a soup, a pie, a decorative centerpiece, or if you're feeling dramatic, a seasonal personality trait. But long before it was spiralized into noodles or roasted with hot honey in Brooklyn restaurants, squash was something else entirely. One of the oldest domesticated plants in human history. And not just anywhere, here in the Americas, which means, unlike wheat, rice, or barley, those old world staples, squash is part of a distinctly indigenous agricultural story that predates European contact by thousands of years. Picture towering Mesoamerican forests, human hands tending creeping vines long before cities like Rome or Babylon even existed. The plant we casually call squash today was already way on its way to becoming essential to ancient life and quite literally helped build civilizations. Botanically, squash refers to plants in the genus Cucurbita, which is part of the larger gourd family Cucurbitaceae, which also includes cucumbers and melons, but that's for another episode. This genus includes what we call summer squash like zucchini or courgette, and winter squash like butternut, acorn, and Hubbard, as well as pumpkins, which are just another kind of squash. So instead of pumpkin spice, maybe we should call it squash spice, which could also sound like the sixth member of the Spice Girls we never got to meet. The word squash comes from the Narragansett Native American word ashkata squash, literally eaten raw or uncooked, which is funny because if you've ever tried to eat a raw butternut squash, that's ambitious. And early English colonists borrowed it directly from indigenous storytellers. Crystal, you tell me otherwise. I know we talked about it at the top where you like to roast them first. Have you ever eaten them raw? Is that a thing?
Yes, I have. When it's dried, you could actually dry them just as you would do jerky, for instance. And
Ah,
yes, you could actually marinate the raw squash and dry them. And then you can actually eat them for there. But also at the same time, you can dry it where you can rehydrate it where it comes into soups. And
tell me about this, and also with the drying aspect of it. How are we doing it? Is this like dehydrating it? Is it just leaving it out? How does that work?
well, either both. The old ways was just pretty much cutting it really thin and leaving it out,
Mm.
especially where it's harvest time. And then also you can use a dehydrator or even freeze dry it. I've done it all.
Oh, and then you were talking about marinating it, so it's like jerky.
Yes. You can also, yeah, I love actually we're in dehydrator. I love cutting the squash really thin. I like paper thin and marinated it in maple and then put it in
Ooh.
a dehydrator and you have a little candy squash.
That is so cool. I wish I had a dehydrator. Is there a way that us non-dehydrator owning people can do it in an oven, or is that too hot?
Yes, you could do it in the oven. I would recommend to do it on 110 and pretty much do it for around a few hours.
Mm,
You can like to slow roast it all
yeah.
the way up until it gets nice and dry.
Ooh, that's so fun. Yeah, because I was thinking about it and I was like, zucchini, sure, sure, sure. You can eat that raw, but other varieties of squash, I was like, I don't know if I've ever have, but maybe that's something that other people enjoy and I just haven't tried it. But this is like a reframe, like a different way of thinking about eating it.
Yeah. You necessarily don't have to use maple, but you can use olive oil. It's your favorite seasonings if you want to add spice or you want to add little herbs to it. You can pretty much do anything with it.
Again, I feel like a common theme of this will just be really putting an exclamation point at its versatility, how it can just either go from sweet to savory so easily. So, if anybody has preference, don't worry, squash has you covered. Well, every species of cucurbita, squashes, pumpkins, gourds, is native to the Americas. The center of its diversity and earliest domestication is Mesoamerica, what we now call Mexico and parts of Central America. Archaeological digs in Oaxaca, Mexico showed evidence of some of the earliest domesticated squash remains ever discovered, going back 8 to 10,000 years, possibly predating maize, also known as corn, and beans. Before corn became the backbone of agriculture in the Americas, people were already cultivating squash, selecting for larger seeds, thicker rinds, and less bitterness, because wild squash, not exactly delicious. Early varieties were often bitter and full of toxic compounds called cucurbitacins. That can actually be toxic in large amounts. Archaeobiological evidence suggests that early humans were likely selecting squash for its seeds first, not its flesh. Over time, through selective breeding, humans reduced bitterness and increased flesh yield. This was a slow transformation, generations of trial, error, and observation. So, squash wasn't just a wild plant gathered here and there. People were shaping it, nurturing it, and adapting it for food and other uses thousands of years ago. Once domesticated in Mesoamerica, squash spread throughout the Americas into the American Southwest and Great Plains, with migrating indigenous farmers and as far north as the Great Lakes region at least 3,000 years ago. In the eastern woodlands, modern eastern US, squash was part of what archaeologists call the Eastern Agricultural Complex, one of the first farming systems in North America. But as previously mentioned, the flesh of the squash wasn't always the star, the seeds were. They're rich in protein, healthy fats, and micronutrients, which made them incredibly valuable in early diets. Crystal, we started to kind of glaze over using seeds, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. I'd love to know more about how you are using the seeds and what you think those bring to a dish and just enjoying on their own maybe.
I really think it's very important for us to utilize the seeds. For instance, we save the seeds and we take them back to the farm and we plant them and then we harvest them. That's something that's been in a Native American practice for thousands of years. And I feel like this is the missing key component where it comes into the squashes. For me personally, I feel like it's kind of always ignored just
Mm,
because maybe me as a chef, I know how to cook it and utilize it, but also people at home, the everyday cook, don't really know what to do with it. So I
mm,
like to showcase it in ways where you can utilize, including the flesh, the skin, and also the seeds. You can blend the seeds up and use them as a beautiful decor powder on top of the roasted squash. You can really
oh,
utilize each of all the squash in many good ways, like as in harvesting our soups, salads. You can do many, it's really versatile and you can do a lot of different things with it. And so I think it's very important people really know one where the squash comes from just because how it's planted and who's their neighbor, like the corn and beans, for instance, and how they really love being planted next to them. But then also for me, what I've seen, especially at our farm, where you can see it's the mother's belly with the babies and you can see the umbilical cord. So when you do see that squash, you see that umbilical cord and how very much alive these seeds are really are.
oh, okay. I would be remiss if I didn't ask a clarifying and follow-up question to that. So when we're talking about this umbilical cord, is this the vine? Is this
Mhm.
okay? And what from that can you take away, or what do you glean from that that lends to the seeds?
Oh, wow. You can very much see as the vine or the umbilical cord, as we call it, you can see how it retains water and
Ah,
you can see how it feeds the squash and it feeds the seeds how it grows. So I find it very one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. If anybody ever had a chance to go to a squash farm, I highly recommend it. And you can see how it's grown. And something that's really grown, like if you're dry farming, for instance, you don't have to water it a lot. You just got to water it every once in a while.
mm.
But how much alive that little beautiful seed is, so much alive, and how it can really speak to us just how nature is.
Oh, that is so beautiful and such a cool thing too, I think, for people to keep in the back of their minds if they do get the opportunity to go see this out in a farm, or maybe they can, watch a video online if they can't make it out somewhere where they know where to go. But I find it so fascinating too. I mean, it goes without saying how interconnected everything is, but how many different cues and clues you can get from just different parts of, people probably just think, oh, okay, I'm looking at this squash. Cool, looks great, amazing. But there's so much more that goes into it, and then not also making the seeds an afterthought, which I think is super cool. Well, if squash has been with us for nearly 10,000 years, the real question becomes, how are people actually eating it? Because domestication is one thing, dinner is another. Squash was so vital that indigenous peoples developed a farming harmony called the Three Sisters. This was an agricultural trio of squash, maize, and beans planted together, a system where the strengths of each plant supported the others. Corn provided structure and gave beans something to climb. Beans added nitrogen to the soil, and squash's broad leaves protected soil moisture and discouraged weeds. The Three Sisters were truly a powerhouse trio, sort of like the Supremes and Destiny's Child circa 2001 to 2006, just in produce form. What we now call the Three Sisters stew was cooked slowly in clay pots, often over low coals. Among Haudenosaunee communities, variations of corn, bean, squash stews were dietary staples. Other preparations centered around what's broadly called calabaza, a general term for squash. Archaeological and ethno-historical records indicate squash was roasted in embers, boiled in stews, combined with chilies and herbs, and eaten fresh when young. Squash blossoms were consumed in pre-contact Mesoamerica and continue to be used traditionally. Blossoms were added to stews, cooked with chilies, and wrapped in tortillas. Now, squash was going beyond feeding people. It equipped them. I'm talking about squash's close cousin, the bottle gourd. When gourds dried, their shells hardened into something incredibly durable, lightweight, and watertight. Records show that they were used for bowls, cups, ladles, storage vessels, and even fishing floats. Crystal, seeing that at least some of the types of these squash were able to be used in such clever and useful ways outside of food, it's something that I think a lot of people probably take for granted these days. Are there any other foods or produce that you can think of that are also used for other purposes?
Oh, yeah, definitely. As we go in, we talk more about corn, for instance,
Yeah.
how you can utilize all of the corn, like it can be utilized like not just to eat, but as and jewelry, or for instance, or if you have the husk, how you can utilize the husk for different things. When I was young, I was given a husk doll, like a corn husk little
Uh-huh.
doll. So you can, that's very playful for young children, but then also you have the corn cob, how you can utilize that for ash. As you're cooking the corn, you can burn it and use it as ash, and how it breaks down, just like if you would do like tortillas, or for instance, it's the lime. It's a
Mm.
natural lime that you can use for that. So you can utilize corn in very many different ways. And so that's one of my favorites. And then you can also, I've seen people make dresses out of them. I've seen people make
What?
different things on the gardens, how you can utilize everything of the corn. So I would definitely say corn.
Oh, I mean, corn has a special place in my heart. I
Mhm.
absolutely love it. In another episode, interestingly enough, I regarded we were talking about our favorite native crops, and mine was corn. I'm fascinated by this. You said make a dress out of it.
Mhm.
How does that go down? I'm so
Well,
intrigued.
wow. For instance, you can utilize it as a skirt. And if you kind of weave them together and use it as a skirt, for instance, you can be really creative, just because you can color it in any different ways that you want to. But then also, I find that you can also use it as a bowl.
Oh my God. I love it. And I mean, obviously I'm learning so much from you, but I never would have thought or realized the clothing aspect of it, which is so it makes me love corn. I mean, I know this episode isn't about corn, but it makes me love corn that much more, realizing how versatile it is and how cool. I would have not thought that. And thank you also for mentioning the jewelry. And so I think that that's and I don't think, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that there are a ton of different produce items or vegetables or things like that that have that same versatility. There's probably an okay number, but I think that that's incredible. Because then I don't know why the first thing that I thought of, I was like, what else can you do with a strawberry? And I was like, I don't know. Probably just eat it. so
Yeah.
so that is incredible. Thank you for sharing that. That is so cool. Way to go, corn, but also obviously way to go, squash.
Yes.
Well, fast forward to the 15th and 16th centuries when European explorers like De Soto, Coronado, and Cartier arrived in the 1500s. They encountered squash everywhere in village gardens, food stores, and growing circles. Naturally, they did what Europeans were doing at the time. They took it. Seeds and fruits soon made their way back to Europe as part of what we now call the Columbian Exchange, where people initially saw them as curiosities or ornamental plants. Over time, squash entered European kitchens and gardens. One example is zucchini, literally meaning little gourds in Italian. Native Cucurbita pepo seeds arrived in Italy by the early 1500s. By the mid-19th century near Milan, Italians had developed what we now know as zucchini, derived from New World squash species. Now, by the time Europeans arrived, they encountered pumpkins and squash already widely cultivated. Colonial accounts describe indigenous people roasting squash in ashes, drying slices for storage, and stewing it with meats. By the 17th century in New England, pumpkins were incorporated into colonial cooking, sometimes stewed with milk and spices. While the famous pumpkin pie in a pumpkin shell story is often repeated, historians note that baked custard-style pumpkin pie evolved later as wheat flour and ovens became more common. Now, if squash were just food, it would still be very impressive. But across many indigenous cultures in the Americas, when a plant feeds you reliably, season after season, generation after generation, it becomes more than agriculture. It becomes identity and symbol. Among Puebloan cultures of the Southwest, particularly the Hopi, agriculture is deeply intertwined with spiritual life. Ceremonial systems, including Kachina traditions, are closely tied to rain, fertility, and crop cycles. While many spiritual figures relate broadly to agriculture rather than the single crop alone, the importance of plants like squash is still embedded. And you can actually see the cultural connection in the Hopi squash blossom hairstyle. Worn by unmarried women, this hairstyle features large spiraled sections on either side of the head. It's understood as a symbol of fertility and readiness for marriage, with visual parallels often drawn to the form of a squash blossom. And if you don't know what this looks like, and you're listening to this as a podcast without images, you know that iconic hairstyle worn by Princess Leia in Star Wars? That was directly inspired by Hopi women and the squash blossom hairstyle. Crystal, we keep getting into this, but squash is truly proving to be so incredible as food, as a symbol, as with a hairstyle named after it. We also see it being taken from Europe, where people clearly didn't know what to do with it or what was going on just yet. And they looked at it as something ornamental and, freaked out. When it comes to different types of foods and cuisines, do you find yourself to be more adventurous and curious if there's something that you never had or worked with before? Are you a little bit, let me stick with things that are more familiar? Where do you land on that scale?
Well, as for me being a chef, I really like doing things that I'm really familiar with, of course, but then I also like to venture off and maybe tap into things I'm not adventurous with. And when it comes into squash, for instance, we talk about the Mohapa squash.
Mhm.
Like I was doing an event one time and they gave me a little baby squash that they utilize, and that's in Nevada, of course. And I had fun to learn more about it, to cook with it, and how much our squashes, especially where it comes into Native American tribes, how very much we're all related where it comes into that. And so I really love utilizing different kind of squashes, what I'm really used to, and really kind of getting to know it
Mm.
and kind of like showing other people how to cook with it. So I guess my answer would be I pretty much like sticking close to home.
Yeah. And this squash from Nevada that you weren't totally familiar with just yet. Can you tell me more about that one and what you ended up doing with it?
Yes, and so I ended up making a soup with it,
Uh-huh.
but you can tell it was used, it looks like a gourd,
Mhm.
like it was the gourd squash that would be dried and used for bowls and things, to cook with and things like that. But then also, I made a soup with it. The skin was really tough, a little bit more tougher than a butternut squash skin, for
Okay.
instance. And I'm used to cooking with winter squash, and where it comes into the Hubbard squash, it's pretty much thick like a butternut squash also. But this squash was very delicate, but then kind of hard to cook with,
Mm.
when probably because I wasn't really familiar, but the taste was really phenomenal. It tastes more nutty, I guess you can say. And it was amazing what can grow in the desert.
Yes,
Mhm.
100%. Yes.
So I was honored. When I'm always honored when you're on somebody else's native land and you get to cook one of their foods and you're not really familiar with. And I love that's one thing I love about cooking different indigenous ingredients.
Yeah, I would turn back and give yourself more credit then. You previously said that you might prefer to cook with things that are more familiar. You've just proven
Mhm.
that that's not the case. You are adventurous and
Yeah,
and you do know how to adapt and
yeah,
open to trying new things. So, yeah, I think that changes your answer to a little bit of both.
yeah.
Well, fast forward to today, summer squash like zucchini, yellow crookneck, and patty pan are beloved in gardens and kitchens worldwide. The zucchini is globally popular, where you'll see it in dishes from Italy and pasta, casseroles, and fritters, to Mexico, where it's called calabacita. Winter squashes like butternut, acorn, and spaghetti keep well through cold months and featured in everything from soups to pies. And in Japan, kabocha squash is most popularly prepared simmered. Pumpkins themselves, varietals of squash, bridge savory and sweet traditions. Think from roasted seeds to pumpkin pie, and by default, our whole PSL season. In many cultures, autumn celebrations revolve around squash. Its versatility means it appears roasted for dinner, pureed in soups, carved into, and baked into pies at Thanksgiving. Indigenous foodways are seeing renewed recognition, with squash remaining essential in traditional and contemporary native cooking. Even its nutritional profile, fiber, vitamins A and C, and more, keeps squash relevant in diets focused on health and sustainability. Squash's long arc, from ancient Mesoamerican gardens to your local farmer's market, illustrates human ingenuity and plant domestication at its best. Sure, it doesn't have the glamour of chocolate or the global dominance of wheat, but its story is arguably more impressive. It's a story of early agricultural innovation, coevolution with humans, and cultural adaptation across continents. Think about it. A plant domesticated over 8,000 years ago by indigenous farmers with one of the most sophisticated farming methods ever developed is still feeding and delighting us today. So the next time you cut into a butternut squash or slice into a pumpkin pie or saute some zucchini, you're connecting with 10,000 years of agricultural history, global culinary traditions, and the interconnected story of humans and plants by the hands of indigenous farmers who understood something fundamental: that survival isn't just about what you grow, it's about how you grow it. And it's still here, still adapting, and still feeding us. Crystal, what do you think about the backstory of squash?
I love it. I love the backstory of squash and how it's still feeding us till this day. And I feel like that's one thing I love about squash, because it has beautiful history and stories. And I love how the part where I can teach, when I do teach about the healing elements of it and then
Mm.
the connection of it. And so I think it's very important everybody knows the history of it, and how you go into a farmer's market, or if you go into a grocery store, you can look at squash, even pumpkin, in a wholly different light. And I like that.
100%
Mhm.
agree. And you mentioned healing.
Yes.
Yeah, can you
That's
expand on that?
Oh yeah, I would love to. It's just having that connection with the land and
Mm.
having that connection with the squash. If you kind of just think about it, if you think about the history and where it comes from, and how many generations, how many people it's fed, that right there is just healing right there, when you have that connection with food, because our food is medicine. And if you know where it comes from, you kind of know where you want to do with it and where you're going.
So true. And I think that that kind of lens is, I don't know how to best phrase it. I don't want to call it unique or a gift, but it kind of is, because I think that a lot of people just maybe take things, and no fault of their own, just take things
Hmm.
kind of for granted. And, oh, I like this, I like that, I'll pick it up, I'll make it, or I'll buy something, that's prepared in a particular way. But I think that, to your point, understanding, and that's also why selfishly I love doing these episodes, is because I feel that it educates me, and also allow for that better appreciation and understanding of your food, by knowing, to your point, where it came from, how it's grown, and any cultural relevancies and stories that go behind it. And I love too that that's something that you enjoy and love to focus on too, with your education of food as well.
Thank you.
Hmm. Our squash varieties have definitely made a mark in pop culture, with the pumpkin really stealing the show. But before we rattle off about the pumpkin, the squash blossom necklace associated with Navajo silversmithing is one of the most recognizable forms of Southwestern jewelry. Developed in the late 19th century, it features silver beads and a central pendant often set with turquoise. Now, despite the name, the design is likely derived from Spanish Moorish motifs, not literal squash blossoms. Still, the name stuck, and today it's a major cultural and aesthetic reference point. The jack-o'-lantern tradition has roots in Irish folklore, originally carved from turnips, but in North America, pumpkins became the preferred medium because they were larger, softer, and more available. Today, carving pumpkins has become synonymous with Halloween. In classic European folklore, and later Disney's adaptation of Cinderella, a pumpkin is transformed into a carriage, and this is one of the most famous symbolic uses of squash in a fairy tale storytelling setting. In 2003, Starbucks introduced the Pumpkin Spice Latte, also known as the PSL. It became one of the most successful seasonal beverages in modern history. It returns annually each fall, signaling the start of pumpkin season, and has generated billions in revenue. But the funny and ironic part is the PSL doesn't really rely heavily on pumpkin itself. It's more about the spice flavor combination of cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. In the 2010s, there was the start of a major food trend driven by low-carb and gluten-free movements. We have zoodles, aka zucchini noodles, and spaghetti squash that stepped in as pasta substitutes. While these are perfectly fine and delicious options, I think that we can all agree that they are not pasta. As of 2023, the Guinness World Record for the largest pumpkin was grown by Travis Genger in Minnesota and Wade. Crystal, would you like to venture a guess of how much this pumpkin weighed?
I believe it will be at about 1,000 pounds.
Okay, well, by Price is Right rules, you would win, but I will tell you, it was actually 2,749 pounds.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
a real big boy. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Have
Isn't
you
that
ever
something?
have you ever seen any kind of squash variety even close to that size in real life before?
Well, of course, I'm here in the Bay. So when I go to Half Moon Bay, they have the pumpkin festival.
Mhm.
So they have a pumpkin patch festival. And that was pretty much the biggest pumpkin I've ever seen. And
Okay.
that was probably at least 500 pounds. But I
Wow.
know I've never heard of a 2,000 pound. Wow.
Yes. And in the United States, October 26th is National Pumpkin Day. Crystal, are there any other pop culture moments that you can think of where squash made a mark, or any final words that you have about your favorite food?
Oh, there's a lot of marks, but I guess personally, where it comes into squash, like just I'm really amazed how you can utilize it, and then how I get the honor to utilize squash. But other than that, I love the story of it and the resilience of it, and how long it's been here, how long it's feeding us, and so those are one of the ingredients that I really love.
Absolutely. Yes. Crystal, thank you so much for sharing your love of squash and helping me to tell its story.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. You can find links and more info in the description below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. See you next time.